So there was some controversy today regarding a fitness influencer whose account is Sarah's Day. That's what her account name is. And it all centered around the fact that her recent campaign for her fitness line, her activewear line, included her wearing some long braids, long colored braids that originally started off as two shorter plaits. And then she realized, if you watch some of her earlier stories, she was like, this isn't quite enough. I want something with a little bit more to it. And so she added these long, colorful extensions in orange and blue to be part of the campaign. And I do know that probably right now you're thinking, this is some white girl here talking about the issue, and it's really not her issue. And it's not. I have really no right to have an opinion on this, which is why I'm not going to tell you my opinion on it. I'm going to give you a brief resume of what I've learned today from this. When I first looked at this story, which I imagine a lot of people will, a lot of very well-meaning people, she was very well-meaning. It was never meant to offend anyone. It was never meant to cause any controversy. It was just something she saw and she assumed looked nice. That's all it was. That was it. There was no malicious intent behind it. And I think this is the time we really need to highlight these issues. So a lot of people in the comments I was reading through, they were saying things like they just couldn't understand that people weren't allowed to wear braids anymore and that this shouldn't really be an issue, etc. And a lot of people were trying to explain why it was an issue, and there was also a lot of anger coming out in the comments as well, which I can understand, but I don't think it is the most productive way forward for a lot of the issues we have today. And as I was watching her stories, I was just thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could go and educate people on that? Because after I watched the stories, I went and did some research myself, and I just thought, okay, there's more to this than I understood. There is more, because I've never educated myself in it. I've never been truly educated myself. I've definitely heard of cultural appropriation, but naively assumed that people just didn't want others that weren't part of that culture to embrace aspects of that culture. So it's a very difficult thing. So I had a look through the comments, and I was just thinking, wouldn't it have been great if this was a chance to educate people on this? And then I saw this amazing comment, and I just thought, yes, girl, this is exactly what I was thinking. You just put it into words beautifully. And it would have been a great opportunity to continue with this campaign and educate people on why this could be taken as cultural appropriation and the history of the use of braids. I had a look myself. I read various articles, I read various people's opinions, and I can see why it caused such a stir. A lot of you know about the controversy with the Kardashians using braids and wearing braids, and when Kylie Jenner was praised so much for wearing cornrows, when someone who came from that culture had been discriminated for that recently and within history. And so it's this idea of someone who, they came from a culture that traditionally used these hairstyles, are not being praised in the same way as someone who is white is being praised, or like it needs to have a stamp of approval from one particular culture to be acceptable. And I could see the problem in that. And so I ended up reading a few articles, I watched a few videos. One of them is amazing, I'll link it here below. And I was like, if I'd learned this a while ago and I'd had this education, I probably would understand the issue more. That's why I want to share it, not because I think I'm some expert in it, because I'm not some expert in it. Just someone who's read about it today, but just thought, wow, people like me would benefit from this. So in the 15th century in West Africa, hair was a symbol of who people were. It showed status, wealth, family, religion, all these different things. It was very, very important, and it formed a part of a lot of these people's identities. And I'm sure it did in other areas as well. It's not exclusive to that culture, but when the slave trade when the slaves were sold to various parts of the world, a lot of them had to shave their heads. And it was meant to be for hygiene reasons, but I'm sure it was to take away what identity they had, so that they realized that they were now under the control of someone else. And eventually, as they were working out in the fields, they began to regrow their hair, and it was put into braids, cornrows, whichever you want to call it.
A big part in that, and not just on an individual level. Since intricate braiding styles often took hours or even days to complete, it was a time of bonding and community between women. During the slave trade, everything changed. As Africans were brought to the New World, their heads were often shaved for sanitary reasons. Africans not only lost their hair, but a part of their identity. Though braids weren't completely lost during slavery, many enslaved Africans started braiding their hair once again as a way to stay connected to their culture and keep their hair neat and tidy while working on plantations. Without the products and treatments typically used in Africa, Africans relied on bacon grease, butter, and kerosene instead of conditioners and cleaners. But this was just a small example of a larger sentiment that revolved around traditional African hairstyle.
These braids were more than just a hairstyle, they were a connection to their original culture. And when we start to move away from the slave trade in the sort of the 1940s, which really, I've seen this before, it still surprises me how recent slavery happened. And in the 1940s, people came out of that, and very, 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 very gradually, Black people were accepted into the workforce, and particularly Black women, they were forced to adopt acceptable hairstyles, which generally involve straight or neater hair. European, or I should say Western European standards of beauty, because braids and stuff, they were a lot more common in Eastern Europe. Sort of the two braids, which I would say a lot of people were saying that Sarah was wearing Dutch braids in this campaign, which is kind of true. But anyway, they were sort of conforming to the Western European standards of beauty, and their natural hair wasn't deemed acceptable then. And so they were encouraged to have these good hairstyles that would mean it meant their status was different.
As slavery ended, Black women in America opted for straight hair, or good hair, conforming to a European standard of beauty. Good hair was a perceived doorway to opportunity, and Black women with straight hair were considered better adjusted or more accepted by their white counterparts.
And then in the 1960s, when there was this movement, this sort of Black power movement where people were trying to regain their identity and increase the awareness of the importance of their culture, gain back their power, essentially. This is when natural hair or natural hairstyles became so much more important. So this is much more than just a hairstyle. It's more than just braids. This is a regaining of their identity and a standing up saying, how I am naturally, or how I style my hair, how I choose to do that is okay. And these styles are okay, and these styles are acceptable, and they should be accepted into the culture. And Cicely Tyson wore cornrows on television. I think she was one of the first people to do that. Were wearing their hair in these braids and cornrows again, and sort of reconnecting with their roots. And this style was then taken up in the movie 10 by Bo Derek. And this became such a controversial topic because she was praised for wearing this style of hair. It was they were termed bow braids. The actual origin of these braids, or their use of them, and the inspiration for this hairstyle was forgotten, and she was the person that was given the credit for this type of hairstyle. And this was difficult because, again, it highlights the idea that something is only appropriate and only accepted if a certain group of people wear it. It's a bit like if you're not popular at school and you wear something and everyone makes fun of you for it, and then someone else wears something and who's has more friends or is more liked than you or is deemed more acceptable than you, and they're praised for it, except just on a lot more of a serious scale. But it's that kind of concept that why is it not okay to be a certain way until someone that is more acceptable wears it? And I get that. Why is it that she was praised for it and a Black person is termed ghetto or whatever for that? It just doesn't make any sense. Black women lost jobs for wearing their hair like that. It was not deemed appropriate, and braids, because they weren't fully understood, were banned because they didn't conform to corporate image. They didn't conform to the image that these companies wanted to portray. And even in 2014, these styles were banned in the US Army, which just blows me away. I'm like, how can you ban someone who is risking their life, or ban a hairstyle of someone who's risking their life? Surely that's more important. Rules, I suppose, these regulations around it were that women needed to kind of saying in one way or another they wanted them to have straight hair. And so one of the suggestions was that they wore a wig in combat. You know, if they're okay to go into combat, they're okay to wear their natural hair. So I can really, it's almost difficult to see someone who is white, who is popular, who is privileged in a sense, wear these and be praised for them so much. And I do think that it actually is a lot more of a positive move than people think. We need to remember the history. Like, I can see why if these come into popular culture and the history isn't remembered, that it gets forgotten. Isn't anything. We need to remember the history of these things, because otherwise we're condemned to repeat them. And imagine if this had been used for an opportunity as to, right, we didn't realize this mess, we actually didn't realize the association between these two things, so let's remind people of this, let's remind people of the history, let's remind people that this is more than just a hairstyle. This tells a story, and this tells a story of struggle, this tells a story of oppression, this tells a story of inequality, and actually use it to positively educate people. Because I think it would have been a lot better move, rather than people just stepping away and like, oh, I didn't mean to upset someone again, God, we're getting so politically correct. Like, no, this isn't about political correctness, it's about remembering a story, about remembering a history. It's so important. I just don't understand what it can bring, what positivity it can bring if we are more and more divided. Dividing us is not going to bring us anywhere but more hate. We need to be united, and it's great in a way as long as these people are forced to accept and celebrate where the origins of like these origins the origins of these style came from. Like, I think it's an awesome way to educate people. Fashion and culture and integration is a great way of educating people. I'm a diabetic, and I wouldn't hate on anyone that didn't fully understand the difference, for example, between the two types of diabetes, or what to do if I'm in a particularly difficult situation, because they're not aware of them. It would be great if everyone were, but people can't be aware of these things unless they're educated on them. And I just think there needs to be this push for education. We are a world of mixed cultures. Tea, the number one thing in Britain, it has an Indian heritage. It comes originally from India. It is not ours, but it's something we have taken. Music, oh my goodness, there's so much cultural appropriation in music, and so many white artists over the course of history have taken from minorities. They have used their music and taken it as their own. And if we open up a discussion, if we open up an ability to educate people, then people can actually see the real history of this. And I feel like that would be a much better way of gaining respect, gaining, I don't know the word I'm thinking of. Gaining respect isn't the right word. There's a word. I can't think of what it is. But basically bringing credit to your ancestors, telling the story of those that struggled through education. I think that's a much better way of doing it, saying, look, we didn't get a chance to tell that story then, but we're going to tell it now, and everyone is going to know. And I think this could have been such a good way of doing it. But I see so often this aggression, which is understandable. It's an awful topic, and these people are still, minorities all over the place are still being oppressed now. And I think it's going to continue in many ways and spread out into more minorities, not just to do with race or cultural background, but also to do with status. We're still struggling everywhere, and education is one of our most powerful tools to go forward. Anger is needed. I needed to have that in my face today, but I don't think most people will go and then educate themselves from it. They would just think, oh, political correctness gone mad again, without actually trying to understand the history. And the more we tell history, and the more we understand that there's so much more than we know, that we assume so much of the time, the better it's going to be. Love Sarah. Like, I love her. She is a positive ray of sunshine, and the way people have talked about her breaks my heart, because I just think, if you've not learned anything from this year, we have seen suicide rocket in many people that, well, in the world, in the media, because of this cancel culture style of dealing with problems where there's one problem and people dig and they dig and they dig and they dig until they take every last drop out of someone that really didn't have any malicious intention to start with. And so we need to really respect people all over. And if you want to take something from another culture, learn about it, learn about its history. And I think the more people talk about this, the better. It was really enlightening to do that today. And I hope more people follow suit, and I hope that I haven't offended anyone by talking about this, because it is not my culture or background. It was purely because it interested me seeing the backlash today on it. I was like, wow, I want to know about this myself, and if I can understand it enough, I want to put that forward to other people. Anyway, thank you. I will leave everything that I saw today, all the articles I looked at today, down below. And yeah.
So I guess you're wondering, why are we still talking about braids? Black hair is coiled in a broader conversation about identity and dominant beauty ideals. And that's why braids are more than just a hairstyle. They have a past. And when we don't recognize that, we lose the history behind it. So give credit. It's hard to hear about young girls who can't go to school with braids in their hair, and yet women who look nothing like them get praised and put on the cover of magazines for the exact same thing. Ultimately, it's about empowering girls and women that they are beautiful in their natural hair state. And that is something worth celebrating.